Good afternoon. It is 800 Zulu time and 4 p.m. in Exmouth, Australia on Thursday, the 10th of January. This is the latest on Tropical Cyclone Narelle from 28storms.com. We begin with the latest update from the U.S. Joint Typhoon Warning Center as of 300 Zulu time, and maximum sustained winds based on their 1-minute estimate were near 75 knots, and the storm is still forecast to strengthen, and once it makes its closest approach to the Gascoyne region, those maximum sustained winds are still forecast to be in excess of 105 knots. You can look at the 35-knot wind radii. That is the forecast when the storm is making its closest approach on the 13th at 0000 hours, or 8 a.m. Sunday local time, and you can also see the 50-knot wind radii just offshore as well, so any deviation slightly toward the east is still going to be bringing some rather significant winds to these coastal communities, and that is why you need to start making your initial preparations. Even if the storm remains on its current course, any loose items will be blown around, and worst case scenario is that the inner core deviates a little bit more toward the east, and in that event we would be dealing with a severe cyclone landfall. As of right now, however, it still looks as though the inner core is going to pass just to your west, but that is still not a 100% guarantee at this time. Also, the official source for information out across Western Australia, that being the Bureau of Meteorology, has now issued a cyclone warning, and that extends from Wim Creek westward all the way to Coral Bay, and cyclone watches extend further down the coast to the south. Their track is very close to the JTWC. By 2 p.m. on Saturday, we can see that the cyclone is forecast to be a severe Category 4 as it makes its closest approach toward Onslow and Exmouth. And we're going to have to monitor the storm surge risk, especially around Exmouth, and the close proximity to the inner core. Just how close that inner core passes is going to make all the difference, not only with the winds, but also the storm surge along the immediate coast. So also make your preparations for that as well. The Bureau also has additional information in their tropical cyclone advice. It reads, severe tropical cyclone Nurel is expected to continue moving to the south-southwest towards the northwest Cape and gradually intensify. Gales with gusts to 100 km per hour are expected to develop in coastal areas between Wim Creek and Onslow, including the Karratha area during Friday, then extend west to Exmouth overnight Friday and to Coral Bay Saturday morning. Winds are likely to increase further during Saturday about the West Pilbara coast, becoming destructive with gusts over 130 km per hour overnight Saturday. Very destructive winds with gusts to 250 km per hour are possible near the cyclone center. Gales may extend south to Cape Covier during Sunday, and I also apologize if I'm mispronouncing that. I'm not exactly from the region, as you may imagine. Thunderstorm activity will increase about the Pilbara coast on Friday, with isolated heavy rainfall and squalls possible. Heavy falls are likely near the West Pilbara coast on Saturday and Sunday. Tides along the West Pilbara coast are likely to rise above the normal high tide mark on Friday night and Saturday, with flooding of low-lying coastal areas. So that is some of the storm surge threat that we've talked about. And also, near the bottom it says that we do have a blue alert in effect for some of those coastal communities, so that means you need to be taking your initial preparations right now. This is the latest national radar and satellite composite, and you can see Tropical Cyclone Nurel continuing to swirl about to the north of Western Australia. But if you look really closely at some of these radar sites along the coast, we can see that the shower activity is already on the rise from around Port Hedland westward, and this is why you want to start making those preparations. We're going to continue to harp on this, because if you don't make those preps now, the conditions on day to day are only going to worsen, so do it now while things are still fairly manageable. Upon closer inspection, we see Cyclone Nurel becoming increasingly symmetric, which is a sign that the storm is continuing to intensify. If anything, that southeast quadrant still needs to fill in some more, but today's visible imagery is certainly very impressive, and you can see the coastal communities down toward the south. Over time, we're going to start using satellite imagery much more than the model guidance. We want to pay close attention to the exact motion of the storm, just in the event that the storm is taking a track slightly to the east of the model guidance, so that is going to be the main concern over the next 24 to 48 hours. But either way, as we've been talking about, you're still going to feel the effects of the storm, as it will be a far-reaching event. As we take a look at some of the most recent intensity model guidance on this graphic, it's important for interest in Australia to understand that the scale being used here is the Atlantic hurricane scale, but nevertheless the models that were most recently initialized with the storm intensity being closer to 75 to 80 knots are still forecasting more in the way of strengthening. Some of the strongest intensity model guidance is showing winds in excess of 100 to 110 knots, and again, that's based on the 1 minute estimate. If you convert everything over to the Australian Bureau of Meteorology standards, those forecasts would easily exceed the criteria needed to label this cyclone as a severe Category 4. One of the parameters a cyclone needs for more intensification is very warm water, and that is exactly what we have to the north of Exmouth, with those sea surface temperatures well in excess of 26 degrees Celsius. And the water temperature is also going to highly dictate the intensity of the storm, especially beyond 2 to 3 days. Once it crosses this 26 degrees Celsius threshold into some of these blues, the storm is going to rapidly weaken. But if it does take that track closer toward Exmouth, that's also bad news for interest down toward the south near Carnarvon, for example, because the water temperatures immediately near the coast are a little warmer, which would allow the storm to sustain itself for an extended period. Category 4 intensity would still be unlikely that far south, but you would still be dealing with a substantial storm for Carnarvon standards. In addition to warm waters, tropical cyclones also need very light upper-level winds in the upper layers of the atmosphere for them to continue to organize, and although we have a very favorable upper-level ridge located to the north of Western Australia, it is still displaced a little to the east of the tropical cyclone, closer to the Kimberley coast, and as you can see with these easterly streamlines, this ridge is acting to actually disrupt the southeast quadrant of the storm with easterly vertical wind shear. However, the models are still advertising the idea that this upper level ridge is going to co-locate with the tropical cyclone, thus bringing in some of these lighter upper level winds closer to the center of the storm, and that is why several are forecasting more in the way of strengthening into a severe Category 4. As we return to the model guidance, as we mentioned in the prior video, some of the model plots shown here are from models that are not quite as accurate as some of the better models that we have at our disposal. Nevertheless, it is still important to cover all of the model guidance, and it is worth noting that some of these model members have shifted a little bit toward the east compared to where they were 24 hours ago, so that just adds more reason for interest along the coast to prepare now for Cyclone Narelle. This is the latest operational output from the ECMWF model, and as we go 24 hours out into time, you can see the cyclone continuing to move toward the southwest or south-southwest along the western periphery of this powerful ridge out across interior Australia. That all along has been the main steering mechanism for this storm, and as we go deeper into the forecast period, you can see the storm making its closest approach to the Gascoyne region, but still remaining just offshore over the next 4 or so days, at least based on this run, with the remnants of the storm moving to the west of Carnarvon over those cooler water temperatures. So overall, this model would still show that gale force winds are still fairly likely along those immediate coastal areas, but the inner core would still stay offshore based on this track. This is the surface representation from that model, valid Sunday morning local time, and you can see that the inner core is still staying well to the west, but this is a little closer than some of the runs from the European model over the last couple of days. And even with this current track, we're still seeing very strong northerly winds near Category 1 intensity. And if the storm deviates a little closer, we're still going to be monitoring that storm surge threat very closely, because you're going to have a lot of water pileup, especially into the southern and western sections of Exmouth Gulf, and even some of those western communities along the western part of the coast. Also, we're going to take a look at the GFS, and this is the output going into Saturday night and Sunday morning. Obviously, the GFS is even more robust than the European. It's a little closer to the coast with the cyclone, and the cyclone is obviously stronger, so you're looking at the very least Category 1 force winds, not to mention if the storm is a little closer to the coast than what the models are depicting. And as the storm continues to move a little more toward the south, I think if it's this far off the coastline, then those cooler water temperatures are likely going to weaken the storm more than what this model is showing. But it still drives home the point that if it's a little closer to Carnarvon with those warmer waters that we saw just a moment ago, then we could still be talking about a fairly strong storm. So there are definitely interesting times ahead for coastal residents of Western Australia, and 28storms.com/cyclone will continue to be updated with more discussions and video updates. And if you haven't visited the website before, in addition to our exclusive information including analysis, we also have a lot of external links on the left hand side of the page. If you want information from the Bureau of Meteorology, you can just open up the tab and there's a lot of in-depth information there. You can check out the latest information from the U.S. Joint Typhoon Warning Center, and you can also check up on some of the latest model guidance that we've looked at. Some of the model links that you see here are where we get some of the models to put together this video. So you can Go ahead and watch everything closely along with us here at 28storms.com, and also don't forget to follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and of course subscribe on our YouTube channel.